talking all things fitness, diet and nutrition related.
Yay, welcome back guys. We're here just to hang with you for the next 25-30 minutes. And I don't know about you, I'm actually going to enjoy that.
Wonderful. Well, today we're talking...
What was that?
I'm not sure. That was a Let's do this again, shall we?
No, we're going to keep rolling.
We're going to carry on rolling. We'll keep the in there.
Tom actually comes out with, when he gets nervous, on these podcasts, he comes out with the funniest noises.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really think we should redo that.
No, I think we need to carry on. Today, we're because, you got to have a giggle.
Okay, leave it in.
Okay, we're actually talking about...
Welcome to the Tojo Fitness Podcast.
Shush. We're talking about salt today.
Yes, we are. Talking about salt and is salt a problem? Isn't it a problem? There's so much spoken about salt these days. Is it a friend or is it your foe?
Well, I don't know about you, but there are certain things that you're like, oh yeah, I really could do with some salt on these. So, for example, I'm not sowing a seed here. Please don't get them. But when you go to the seaside and you have chip shop chips, and you're like, yeah, I'm just going to need a bit of salt on those, and you put on half the canister of the salt.
Yeah, you've got to have salt on your chips.
Guilty.
I was in Zimbabwe, 35 years ago, with a gentleman who used to have poached eggs for breakfast every morning. Right. And he used to like salt. And he used to get the salt pot, and he used to have his poached eggs sitting on this piece of toast, and he would just pour the salt on top and you could hear him crunching through the salt as he ate his eggs. And people said to him, that's really bad for you. And so he actually wrote the scripture from the Bible, salt is good, and stuck it to the salt pot to justify him using so much salt. He actually lived to a ripe old age.
Funny that.
But the question is, and still remains, is salt actually good for us? And if so, how much should we do? And why is it some people seem to be able to eat as much as they want and get away with it, and other people don't?
So let's look at, what's the role of salt, first of all, in the body? What is it? What is salt? Apart from tasting great.
Salt is two things. It's sodium and it's chloride. And both of those are essential minerals that act as electrolytes in the body. Now, electrolytes are substances that conduct electricity when dissolved into water. So your body, I think we spoke about this last podcast, is that your body works on the basis of lots of electrical signals zipping around your body all the time.
Fascinating.
And the thing to conduct those electrical signals, you need electrolytes. That's why they're called electrolytes.
Electrolytes.
And it conducts your electricity. So without those electrolytes, your heart, the electrical signal which causes your heart to contract, won't work.
Wow.
It'll short circuit. Electrolytes will help maintain blood fluid and fluid volume and blood volume and so on. If you're not getting enough electrolytes, you're going to get weak. You might end up vomiting with muscle spasms, confusion.
So this is why when some people say, I've got cramp, I might not be having enough salt.
Yes, although it's sometimes not just sodium chloride, that can be potassium and other issues as well. Yeah. But if you have somebody who runs like a marathon, for instance, and they run a marathon, they've been drinking lots and lots of water, no salts in with those, just loads of water, it's flushing out, all the sweat is pouring out of them, all the electrolytes are coming out of their body, all the salts are coming out of their body, if you like, no new salts going in, and towards the end of that marathon, they can actually get quite sort of like they're on a high, like they're on drugs, and it can actually get quite dangerous. And what happens is because the brain isn't the neurons are misfiring because the electrolytes aren't able to transmit the electrical signals across the gaps, across the synapses. So we need to have electrolytes in our body. We need salt. Without salt, we will die. So my friend was absolutely correct. Salt is good. Thing is, it's found in almost all foods, particularly in, celery, milk, beets, or just pretty much everything. There's a little bit of salt in there. The problem in the West is that the majority of our salt now comes from processed foods and from restaurant foods and stuff where they add salt.
And here's the thing, it's like, for example, if you've ever been for a McDonald's, If you've ever been for a McDonald's and you felt really thirsty afterwards, like go, like their food is just smothered in salt, but then you want to go back and eat some more afterwards.
Because salt, it stimulates the salivary glands, makes you want more, stimulates your appetite. It's also one of the reasons why they would, back in the day, they don't tend not to do this so much now, but they would stick on the bar of a pub ready salted peanuts free of charge.
Wow.
Because you would then take the ready salted peanuts, you'd
drink more.
Yeah, you'd be eating a lot of salt, which made you hungry, made you thirsty, and so you'd then drink more.
Course.
Although
those nuts do taste good though. Probably wouldn't have them these days, in the COVID era, but there we go.
So we add huge amounts of salt to food, to processed food.
Yeah.
And the reason is there's three things which stimulate us, our adrenal glands and so on, which cause us to want to eat more and more. And that's fat, salt, and simple sugars.
Right.
And so they will put in food, even food that isn't meant to be sweet, they'll put simple sugars in there, because if they can mix fat and simple sugars and salt together, that's just like a chemical concoction that your body absolutely flips out about, and then wants to eat more, which is why it's very easy to eat a hot, 2,000 calories worth of pizza, but it's very hard to eat 2,000 calories worth of broccoli.
Or chicken.
Or chicken, although they do inject chicken with saline to not only make the chicken more, and also bacon. Not only to make it way more, so you're but also because it preserves it. It also
gives it good flavour.
Gives you flavour.
Yeah. So what happens? Like, is there such a thing as actually having too much salt in the body?
Yeah.
Like, and what's the side effects of that?
Well, salt is normally linked to blood pressure, and high salt is linked to a rise in blood pressure. And the way this works is incredible. When you have too much salt, it causes an increase in sodium in your blood. Now, what sodium does, sodium never exists alone. Right. Sodium loves water.
Okay.
So when there's sodium, it sucks water in. It wants to marry, if you like. Imagine it's a single guy, and he's desperate for a wife, and his wife is water.
They're lobsters.
Yeah. He starts sucking, trying to find all this water and get it into his system, which is why when you eat salt, you want water. It's the sodium desperately wanting to marry water. So when there's sodium in your blood, it sucks water from your system and increases water in your blood.
Yeah.
Now, why is that a problem? Well, when there's more water in your blood, when there's more blood volume, you've then got, imagine a hose pipe. You've now got a greater volume of water in that hose pipe than you otherwise had. Yeah. Now, that hose pipe is going to expand.
Yeah.
It's actually going to damage the hose pipe. It's like putting water at a high pressure down a tube which isn't intended to have it travelling in high pressure.
Gotcha.
So what the arteries do long term to try and deal with this is they think, well, what we actually need, if this hose pipe is going to be used for high pressure, we need to have a thicker hose pipe. And so it starts creating the hose pipe, the arteries get stiffer and the arteries get thicker to cope with all the extra fluid. And what this means is that your blood pressure goes up even more, because a thicker artery means there's even less space.
But I guess as well, because you've actually got more fluid in the body itself, that puts a strain on the kidneys as well. Because the kidneys are actually having to work overtime to actually deal with the increase in their in tray.
Absolutely, absolutely. He's totally right. So we've got this double whammy here of there's more fluid, there's more blood, which raises your blood pressure, going through smaller, thicker arteries, stiffer arteries, which causes this huge increase in blood pressure. And according to the World Health Organization, high blood pressure is responsible for 62% of strokes and 49% of coronary heart disease.
Ooh.
Which is pretty...
That's pretty high though, right?
Pretty huge, isn't it?
Yeah. And the thing is with blood pressure, as an aside, if it's not like something which runs in your family and there's nothing you can do about it, usually it can be reversed by Good
Diet
food.
and exercise.
Diet and exercise, which is actually one of the best prescriptions that you can be prescribed.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway.
Even if you don't have high blood pressure, reducing your salt is probably a good idea anyway.
Yeah.
We're going to come to this in a moment, but many studies have shown that too much salt can actually harm your cognitive function, your brain function.
Really?
Yeah, and this is really interesting because the results show that excess salt causes memory and thinking problems. And this is because in the small intestine, there's a reaction happens and it drops the production of nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is a chemical which causes the blood vessels to dilate. So, for instance, if you go outside and it's hot, the hot weather, the sunshine hits your skin, there's a chemical reaction, nitric oxide is released. It actually dilates the blood vessels, which reduces your blood pressure. So there's now the same amount of blood, but larger blood vessels. And so your blood pressure drops. That's why your blood pressure drops during the summer generally, or when you're in a hot environment. So that drops. But the nitric oxide is stopped in its tracks in the presence of large amounts of salt. So it's a problem, of course, and that has an effect on your brain because your brain is largely blood vessels.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy.
Now, here's the big thing. And if you go onto the internet right now and you ask about salt, you'll find lots of conflicting advice on this. And the reason is because not everyone who eats a high salt diet will necessarily have high blood pressure. Now, I have very, very low blood pressure. And I can eat as much salt as I want and it will not affect my blood pressure. It just doesn't really affect it. And that's because I'm not salt sensitive. Now, there are other people who are very salt sensitive, and those people, it will affect their blood pressure very, very quickly, just a very small amount of salt. And that's because our blood pressure is affected by a whole bunch of other factors, not just how much salt's in our diet. So now, what are we going to do? Are we all going to run out there and buy healthy salt?
Oh, low salt, wasn't it?
Low salt was a big thing, wasn't it?
That was a thing. I remember that. My dad used to have low salt.
Well, the latest thing, of course, is this pink Himalayan salt, isn't it?
Yeah, I've seen that too. It just looks pretty.
It's nice, isn't it? Now, the idea behind Himalayan salt is that it's better for it lowers your blood pressure.
Right.
Well, the problem is Himalayan salt, wherever the salt comes from, it's still sodium chloride, and it's still going to have the same effect. Differences with Himalayan salt is that the tinted pink colour actually comes from trace minerals like potassium, magnesium and calcium. And potassium is protective against sodium. Potassium, if you like, is the anti-sodium.
Right, so it doesn't get together with it.
Yeah, it reduces. If sodium chloride increases blood pressure, potassium works in the opposite way, lowering your blood pressure.
Right.
However, the amount of salt you put in your food, whether it's pink Himalayan salt or whatever, you're really not going to get much bang for your buck out of the potassium that's in there. No. You're better off to eat a banana and save your money. Pink Himalayan salt is beautiful. It tastes lovely, but it's very expensive.
They got it down the seafront actually here.
Really?
A whole stall of pink Himalayan salt.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who knew? Pink Margate salt.
Pink Margate, it probably is
That's
actually.
Right.
They've just dyed it.
So you probably, unless you've got money to burn, better off to save your money from the pink Himalayan salt and eat more potassium, because potassium is really good. And this is why, if you've got high blood pressure, we're going to do two things for you. We're going to say to you, start reducing your salt levels.
Yeah.
Now, the salt you add to your food is probably only a small amount of the salt that's actually in your diet. Most of the salt in your diet is going to come from artificial foods, if you like.
Yeah.
So what we really want to be doing is reducing the amount of processed foods we're eating, and we want to increase the amount of potassium that we're getting into our diet. And potassium obviously comes from things like bananas and fruit and vegetable, beans, seafood and dairy and all that sort of stuff. So how much salt is a safe amount of salt? Any ideas?
I have no idea.
Well, they reckon about 6 grams a day. 6 grams a day, which is about a teaspoon of salt. Okay, teaspoon of salt. Now,
That's quite a lot, though. Do you think?
Well, it is, because most of us would go, well, we don't actually add a lot of salt to our diet.
Yeah,
I certainly don't add a teaspoon of salt.
But what are you eating already that contains salt?
There you go. So check out, if you're eating biscuits, huge amounts of salt in biscuits. Now, biscuits, why are they addictive? There's salt, there's fat, and there's sugar.
There's also one that makes me sad with the amount of salt, and that's cheese.
Yeah, cheese. Huge amounts of salt. One of the main reasons why we love cheese is we want to add it to food. Why is it so nice on the top of pasta? Because pasta itself is often quite bland, but you put cheese on it, it's the salt that does it.
And also crisps. Like you can, if someone says, "Oh yeah, I can eat a whole bag," a whole share bag in one sitting, it's purely because of the amount of salt within your diet.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you check this out? Well, just check on the label. See how much sodium is in there. Now, sometimes the labels only show the sodium content, not the salt content, which is sodium chloride. If you want to do the conversion, just multiply the sodium by 2.5. Example, 1 gram of sodium per 100 grams is 2.5 grams of salt per 100 grams. So you want to keep that below 6. Now, most people in the UK are eating about 8. In America, it's up to 9 or 10.
They must be up to their necks in salt over there.
And in China and Japan, lots and lots of salt. High, up to 10 or 12 grams of salt. Now, they're much more salt tolerant there, which is why it shows less of an increase in blood pressure, but that amount of salt does mean an increase in the likelihood of stomach cancer, which is at a very, very high level in those countries.
It's things like this you just don't even think about unless you do a lot of research, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's some things which we obviously want to make sure, if you're a baby, babies don't want a high salt intake. They want a low salt intake. If you're carrying excess water, that's probably connected with your amount of salt. Your kidneys are unable to get rid of the amount of water that's there. If you've got kidney disease, obviously you're going to be on a low salt diet. I want to finish this by talking the other side of the coin for a few moments.
Okay.
And talk about salt for athletes. Because here's the difference. If you are an athlete, particularly an endurance athlete, then you're going to need a little bit more salt in your diet.
Yeah, it all comes out through your skin.
And that your trainer is going to need to talk to you about that. But for the general purpose, unless you're an endurance athlete, keep your salt levels reasonably low. It doesn't mean to say you can't put a bit of salt on your veg. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean we want to be cutting down as much as we can on the salt that's in our processed foods. So that's about salt. Is it a friend or is it a foe? You decide. This is Tojo Fitness, and you've been listening to our podcast.